Hello, and welcome to this episode of Inside Legal ESG. My name is Pamela Cone, and it is my honor to serve as the host for this podcast series. We are delighted to have with us today Joshua Domb, the founder of Gen R Law, based in London, and he's going to tell us all about that story. Welcome, Joshua.
Hey, Pamela, thank you so much. Really thrilled to be here with you today.
It's our pleasure. So let's get started with the story of how and why you started Gen R Law.
Sure. So by background, Pam, I'm a white-collar crime lawyer. So I spent 7 or 8 years doing all things bribery, corruption, fraud, money laundering, tax evasion at DLA Piper, Paul Hastings, and finally McDermott, Will and Emery. And I loved it. It was everything I wanted from my legal career. It was stressful. It was fast-paced. It was crazy. It was salacious at times, and it was truly great fun. But about 5 years ago, I started to get interested in climate change, actually, and it started as nothing more than a passive interest. And that interest grew. It grew into curiosity and concern, and it got to the point where, I'm 34 now, but I was 30, 31, lying awake in bed at night. I couldn't sleep anymore. I was so scared of what was coming down the track. And as much as I loved everything I was doing as a pure white-collar crime lawyer, it didn't take me long to recognize that I wasn't making any sort of material difference to climate change. Thankfully, part of my life plan had always been to take a year out and go traveling. And so in August 2022, my wife and I packed up our house, hopped on a plane to Australia, and I just got some headspace. I got away from everything. I had time to think and to reflect. And after a bit of a false start with a green tech startup company that I'd taken a bit of an interest in, I stepped back and said, okay, I know I have all of these legal skills. I know they're useful somehow in the context of climate change. I think if I'm going to learn how to do this, I need to go and work at whichever law firm is dealing with climate change. And I'll go and be a senior associate there, probably they're in their investigations team. And then in 3 years' time, I can go and move in-house and make an impact that way. So I picked up my phone and I opened, Chambers, I opened Legal 500. And at first, Pam, I really struggled because I wasn't sure what to search for. I realized very quickly that this wasn't environmental law. In my mind, this was much bigger. And I searched a range of terms. And I came up with a number of different individuals and occasionally a small team. And they were all working some aspect of this challenge. But all of these individuals and all of these teams were at all of the corporate law firms that I knew very well. Right. They're all very good firms, but I immediately knew that they were not what I was looking for. In my mind, coming at this from a UK perspective, in the same way that when one thinks of banking, for example, one thinks of Allen and Overy, now A&O Sherman. When one thinks of insurance, one thinks of Clyde & Co, one thinks of shipping, one thinks of Int. I thought there was a law firm I was supposed to think about when I thought of climate change, because it's climate change. And I already knew at that time there was not going to be any single issue that would be a greater driver of risk and therefore legal work over the next 50 years than this issue. And it took 3 or 4 days, but I had this slow creeping realization that actually there was no law firm dealing with climate change, not in the way that I was imagining and not in a truly purpose-led, mission-driven manner. So I reflected for a period of time, and ultimately, having been inspired by a few good friends and the story of Client Earth, I bought myself a notepad on New Year's Day 2023, and I just started scrapbooking. I thought to myself, what does the law firm I want to work at look like? And ultimately, I built a framework around 7 core principles, which was that I wanted to be in a full-service law firm that practiced every aspect of the law through the lens of climate change, which put its money where its mouth was by donating 10% of its profits every year to environmental causes and charities, which had a specific focus on supporting the green tech startup community, and which again supported that by investing 10% of its profits each year in green tech startups, which did pro bono work to support climate change and environment-focused initiatives, which had a specific focus on empowering young people to be part of the work against climate change, and which incorporated, where it could, lessons and ideas from indigenous peoples into the way that it conducted itself and advised its clients. And when I got all of that down onto one sheet of paper and stepped back, and I thought, well, okay, it's a little bit radical, but actually, it is the law firm I want to work at.
Mhm.
In this day and age of climate-dominated risk, that is a law firm which I believe would be truly useful to clients and would have a genuine USP. I'd be willing to bet, Pam, that there are 500 lawyers in the City of London and 10,000 lawyers around the world who would jump at a chance to go and work at a law firm like that right now if the opportunity arose. And actually, the more I reflected on it, the more I thought perhaps it's not actually that radical. Maybe it just hasn't been done yet. And so I had a concept. And thankfully, and really critically, when I look back, what I had was time to slowly work through that concept in my mind and to get over the fear that is inherent in any sort of proposition like that. And when I got to a certain point in developing that concept, I sort of came back to my starting point was well, that's all well and good, but what am I going to do if I'm going to be the first employee, the founder, and the managing partner? And actually, as I educated myself, again, slowly over months and months, and with the benefit of all the reading that I'd already been doing for several years, I started to see that when it came to ESG, at least, 80% of all of this work was governance. It was policies and procedures and risk assessments and training and leadership and due diligence. And actually, I started to realize everything I had been doing as a white collar crime lawyer for the last 7 years, I had just been doing it in the context of the UK Bribery Act and money laundering. So I started to realize that actually I had a core set of soft skills that I could bring to the challenge. I realized that I had a good grounding in all things governance, the G and ESG. And okay, I needed to upskill myself a bit on the E and a bit on the S, but I've been reading about these things for a long time and I wasn't coming into this from nothing. And I started to put together a set of legal services that sat, I would say, uncomfortably under the heading of ESG, because no law firm has yet figured out ESG as a legal offering. And I thought, A through D, actually, I'm competent to do that now. And E through G, I'm not yet competent, but I know what I need to go and study, and I can make myself competent. And I thought I can support that with a compliance offering, which is squarely my bread and butter. I can support that with an investigations offering that is really focused on investigations with an environmental or social nexus. And again, I had time. I slowly worked through this for 7 or 8 months. My wife and I got back to the UK last September. It took 3 weeks to unpack the house. And I took a brave pill, pulled up my big boy pants and said to my wife, I think I want to do this. And she said, go for it. And the next day I incorporated my first company, and 2.5 months ago, I got my SRA authorization, and that firm was born. And I'm the first to say it's a very large and very ambitious vision, but actually I'm 34. I've got 40 years to work at it. And I tend to think that if I get 10% of the way there, I've done something useful. And perhaps slightly selfishly, Pam, but more importantly, I sleep again at night because I'm taking action and I'm doing something. And that is worth all of the fear and discomfort that comes with this journey. And that is how this firm came to be born. And that's how I'm going to try and make some sort of useful contribution to this extraordinary challenge.
And it reminds me of something you wrote recently where you quoted Barack Obama. His mother said to him, if you're unhappy about something, don't sit around and mope, don't sulk, get up and do something about it. And that's exactly what you've done. So what surprised you the most since the day you opened your doors to now?
So I first put the concept of what is now Gen R Law on LinkedIn at the beginning of November last year. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that I've been flooded with messages from lawyers all over the world who are really interested, really excited. They're asking for jobs. They're asking for work experience. A lot of them are offering their time for free. I think that everyone is starting to recognize this gap. And a lot of people are really pleased to see a proposition like Gen R Law now entering the market, albeit, at the moment, just as myself in my little home office, but that's fine. I think if I've been surprised by anything, I knew I was going to get some positive reception and some positive support, but actually the breadth and extent of it has been really remarkable and really uplifting.
Yeah. I can imagine that most lawyers dream of working in a law firm or at a company that they feel is making a difference or having an impact. And they just haven't thought through it to the extent you have to actually, yes, I'm going to start my own law firm and this is what we're going to focus on. It's very exciting.
It is exciting. I think, particularly amongst young people, what you just said is really something that holds true. 70% of the people that have been reaching out to me, I describe as young people. You know, they're under 30, and we have some really deep conversations, right, about what they're doing, and some of them are in tears. You know, we have Zoom calls like this, and these people are working, 2,500 billable hours a year on really intense topics. It's burning them out. And at the end of the day, much like I couldn't, they can't sleep because nothing they're doing is shifting the needle on this extraordinary challenge that is coming for all of us one way or another. I've said it so many times, but it is not too much for young people to ask for purpose in their legal careers. I think it is the least that we owe them. And I think that a lot of the best firms are going to start losing their very best talent pretty soon if they don't recognize that reality and start to think about these issues much more carefully.
Yep. And it can't be a side project. It can't be finding purpose by volunteering once a year at some program that their firm is sponsoring. It has to be purpose in the work they do day in and day out.
Disseminated from the partnership and the leadership right through every level of the organization and reflected in occasionally a willingness to say, no, we're not going to do this work for this client because we're concerned about the impact that it will have. And I think with respect to my colleagues, that's where a lot of law firms are going to struggle to take that step in the way that I have the opportunity to do because I'm starting with a blank slate, and that makes my life easier to an extent.
Yep, that's right. You mentioned younger people. So, and I have firsthand experience of the mentorship program you've started because I was honored to serve as a speaker for them. Tell me about that. Tell me how the idea got generated and what the response has been. Sure.
So one of the first opportunities that I was given in my legal career was actually a cousin of mine. He's now a King's Counsel barrister and occasionally serves as a judge. And he invited me to come and shadow him for a week when I was, I think, 18. And at the end of the week, we were sitting having lunch, and I was desperate. I said, Jonathan, will you please let me pay for lunch? And he said, no, absolutely not. He said, I have one rule in exchange for all of this, which is you pay it forward, right? When someone comes to you one day and you're in a position to do so, you open doors for them and you give them an opportunity. So I really took that to heart, and mentoring people has always been something I've sort of done and enjoyed doing as part of my legal career. It was about 2.5 months ago now. My wife and I went to an event that was hosted by the King's Global Institute for Women's Leadership, which is chaired by Julia Gillard, who is the only woman to ever serve as the Prime Minister of Australia. We learned about her story on our journeys across Australia. And at that event, a survey was presented by the UK and Ireland CEO of IPOS Mori, talking about attitudes towards gender equality, and actually some really concerning findings that things are going in the wrong direction, particularly and surprisingly, perhaps amongst younger people. One of the themes that kept coming out of that discussion was the role and importance of male allyship in promoting and supporting women through their careers. And what that chimed quite nicely with was an observation I've made since stepping into the climate space, which actually is that when you go to a climate-focused event, probably 70% of the people in each room are women. And so I had observed this real weight of women sort of coming into the climate space, particularly in the legal profession. And I started to wonder sort of out loud whether I might be able to use this platform that I'd sort of created through Gen R Law to do something useful in this space. And so on International Women's Day this year, I put the idea out there on LinkedIn, saying, up front, I have no idea exactly what this is going to look like, but I'm imagining a combination of one-to-one career coaching sessions and guest speakers who I will invite along. And I thought maybe I'll get 6 or 8 applications, and that would be great. And I was rather overwhelmed. I got about 25 applications all in within a week, had to shut the thing down because right now Gen R Law is just me. And I took an initial cohort of 14, and they are my pride and joy, Pam. They're absolutely extraordinary women. They're so passionate about climate issues, about ESG issues, and we are working together through a 12-month program that we have designed as a group. to hopefully help some of these women find their way into climate and ESG focused roles and to progress through their career. I have one rule, one condition for every member of the group, and it was the first thing I said to them, the first time we came together virtually, which was pay it forward. And hopefully they will take that to heart and will spark off some really positive change.
Well, they certainly are a very engaged group because, as you know, when we did our session earlier this week, the questions didn't stop. The questions just kept
barely
coming.
Gave you a chance to speak, I thought, before the questions started flying in. It was great.
Which was wonderful. You rarely get that level of engagement, so I really enjoyed it. Which legal topics related to ESG are the hottest in your opinion? What are you seeing that everyone is talking about?
So I think given the nature of ESG, we could probably record a 1-hour podcast just on that.
Just on that.
just to pick three that I think are particularly driving things at the moment. I think reporting requirements. I know a lot of your guests have reflected on this, but they are really driving a focus on the full spectrum of ESG issues. They're forcing businesses and indeed law firms and other suppliers to these businesses to get their own house in order and to start to ask questions and to gather the data together in a way that they can reflect upon. And I think actually businesses are really starting to see this as a positive opportunity to have a bit of a refresh, look at the state of play and see where they can use ESG and the data that they are pulling together to find efficiencies, reduce their footprint, and actually then win confidence from the market and from customers. So I think reporting requirements are really topical and will be for years to come. Greenwashing, I think, is a big ticket issue as well. I think it's a real concern and fear for businesses. I think we're seeing regulators getting far more active, but we're also seeing NGOs increasingly successfully bringing greenwashing cases against some large corporates. I think the next iteration of that is we're going to see company-to-company greenwashing claims. We're going to see competitors alleging that their counterparts are engaging in greenwashing by holding themselves out as particularly sustainable or environmentally friendly when they know because of the nature of their industry that that's not the case. So I think that's going to be something that we'll see over the next few years. And then with regret to move away from the E and ESG for just a moment and focus on one of the other topics, data protection and cybersecurity. I think are top of mind for big businesses. We've seen a lot of quite prominent data breaches recently, and that is a worst nightmare for so many businesses. And also people are becoming increasingly concerned about what of their corporate data is being fed into AI. And so I think that's going to be a real area of focus over the next sort of 1 to 3 years, I'm sure, and well beyond that.
So that leads me to my next question. When I have you back a year from now, what will be on the horizon then? What will we talk about in 1 year?
So I think from the perspective of the legal industry, which is, of course, where your listenership is particularly focused, I'd like to think we'll probably have a few more firms like Gen R Law, actually, that will have sprung up around the world as truly mission-focused organizations. I think we're going to see more young people finding the confidence to step into ESG leadership roles, and that's going to be, in law firms and also in big companies. I think reflecting on the point I made earlier about law firms having to be a bit more thoughtful about what work they will do in what circumstances for which companies. More law firms are going to have published client onboarding policies, like Gen R has, for example, on its website, and they'll start to decline certain types of instructions. I think one of the things that perhaps will be less popular is that law firms are going to start stepping back their claimed capabilities in the ESG space. I think a lot of law firms have perhaps somewhat clumsily held themselves out as being able to service the full range of ESG issues on a genuinely cross-practice basis. I think closer scrutiny would challenge that, partly because ESG and climate has never been part of legal training, right? Which is a matter of great regret, but it is the reality. So the unfortunate current position is that 99% of lawyers are not climate literate, and it must therefore flow from that 99% of lawyers are not competent to advise on ESG issues. So I think we'll probably have a bit of an adjustment there. And hopefully, Gen.R Law, I'll have at least one other partner and a couple of associates, and that would be a really solid first year.
I look forward to that conversation because I can already tell it will be a very successful year for you. So this is my favorite wrap-up question. Given all of the challenges in this space that you face every day, that I face every day, what gives you hope to keep going?
The team.
The team?
The team. So I tend to think that those of us working on this challenge are the biggest and most extraordinary team that the world has ever known. We speak every language. We have every PhD that has been invented. We sit across every age group and every demographic. And some of us are billionaires, and some of us are amongst the very poorest in the world. And some of us are academics, and some of us are business people, and there are scientists and engineers and lawyers and politicians, and there are indigenous land defenders, and there are journalists, and there are CEOs, and then there are those working in nature conservation and restoration. There are the 14 women in my amazing mentoring cohort, and there are the people listening to this podcast. There are your other guest speakers. And that team is working every aspect of this challenge from every angle and applying pressure to every aspect of the system. And we don't sleep, we don't stop, and our ranks are swelling at the rate of thousands of people a day. And that, when you pause and reflect on it, I truly think is extraordinary. I think we are a million tiny ripples coming together to make waves and eventually tsunamis. And we will have an impact. We are already having an impact, and the speed at which that is happening is only increasing exponentially. So, at the end of the day, Pam, when I sort of put my head down, exhausted, and go to sleep, I do it knowing that there are millions of people who are just sitting down at their desks to pick up where I've left off. Mm-hmm. And in 8 hours' time, when I wake up, they're going to take a break and I'm going to pick up the shift. And there's power in that, and there's comfort in that, and there's real optimism in that. And that is what gives me hope. The team that I see myself as a part of, knowing I will never meet 99.9% of them, but that's okay. And they're out there, and they are supporting me, and I'm supporting them. And collectively, we have a long way to go, but we also have a lot of hands at the tiller and a lot of brain power, and we're going to shift the needle, at least to an extent.
That is such a wonderful perspective, and particularly for those of us who are running our own little small business is often a very lonely place to be, but to have the perspective that we are just one player in a pool of 1 million players or more is a wonderful perspective. And I too now am going to go to bed at night knowing others are working while I'm sleeping to help move things forward.
And it'll help you sleep that much more soundly to go to and I think that's really important. And you're right, this is a really lonely place to be, and it's a difficult journey to be on. And there's a heaviness that comes with being as climate aware as we are. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, we have to force ourselves to stay positive in the face of some difficult odds. But if there's one thing that I know to be true about human nature, it's that humans are extraordinarily good at achieving the so-called impossible. And climate change will just be the latest in a long story of things that everyone said was impossible that we will rise to. Of course we will rise to it, because that is what we do as humans.
It's what we do as humans, and we really don't have a choice. If we want to continue on as humans, there is that. So thank you so much for your time today, Joshua. Your story is just so inspiring, and I hope that among our listeners, we will have many other people like you who will set out to start their own journey, build their own law firm, and build teams of people working on this. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Pam, and thank you for this podcast. I've learned so much from listening to it over the last year or so, to be invited to be a part of it is really quite humbling. And please keep up the great work, because I love listening.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.